My name is Jackie, and I work for Kairos Fellowship, where I'm the executive director. And again, we are fighting for a world where tech works for all. And sometimes that includes some technical difficulties that we have to work through. So we're working, and we're going to keep rolling. Again, thank you all for joining us today. So we are working to really demystify how technology impacts our lives and our democracy, and how we build, and we're also thinking about how we build power and thinking about how tech is intersecting with everything in our lives. And so with that in mind, it's only right that we talk about AI, specifically generative AI. And so, I'll name AI feels like a new topic for some of us, right? It's been presented as this new piece of promised tech that will make our lives more efficient, more safer, and push us towards the next stages of innovation, right? Innovation and discovery. But we know that there's more to that story, right? As it currently stands, that promised efficiency, safety, and innovation is only happening for a few of us, with harm and risk to communities that look like mine, and that might look like yours. It might look like the communities of people that you care about in this room and on the live stream, right? And so I'm really talking specifically, though, about Black, brown, poor, and working class folks whose lives are seen as an acceptable write-off in the name of innovation. It also comes with an acceptable risk or write-off to the climate, our climate, at a time where the climate crisis has reached unprecedented heights. And so today you'll hear about some people who are doing some really, really amazing work pushing back against innovation at the cost of others. You'll hear about the harms that have shown up around AI, generative AI, and what those harms have meant as it continues to gain traction, and the organizing that's being done to push back and combat those harms. And so, innovation, or as some other people like to think about it, magical thinking around AI can happen, but it can't come at the expense of others. And so, with that in mind, I will pass it over to our moderator for today, Rachel Kitchen. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody so much for joining us today, and thanks to those online as well. My name is Rachel Kitchen. I lead the fossil-free IT campaign at Stand.earth, where we are working to push fossil fuels out of the tech industry. So I'm just going to start off with a little definition of greenwashing and let you all make your own minds up from there. So greenwashing refers to a claim that either overstates positive environmental attributes or underplays environmental harm, fundamentally. So it feels now, in the world that we live in, like AI is everywhere, from web searches to your Instagram feed, news articles, very likely into your workplace as well, whether you want it or not. It's now officially a matter of national security, and it's functionally an arms race. And as it's rapidly gone from a novelty to a necessity, you've almost certainly heard the claims that are being used to justify its rollout. AI will cure cancer. AI will increase productivity. AI will solve climate change. Over the past few months, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, hyperscalers of AI website services, all released their latest sustainability reporting. While all of them kind of quietly acknowledged that there have been some increases in emissions as a result of this kind of AI growth, although Amazon actually did stop reporting the real numbers a few years ago, the kind of common through line of these reports was that they all tried to magic away the reality, which is with broad, sort of unverifiable claims that AI still holds the answers. And the message, which will be kind of familiar to those of us working in climate for a while, is that the emissions and the fossil fuel growth now is a necessary bump in the road to ultimate sustainability. In the Amazon report, we saw Chief Sustainability Officer Kara Hurst claim that the company has harnessed AI as a powerful sustainability tool, solving countless environmental challenges while simultaneously improving service quality. Brilliant. A recent investigation, however, found that Amazon's data centers are set to use up to 46 terawatt hours of electricity each year, which is just short of the annual consumption of Hong Kong. Google's report, which earmarked $75 billion in AI expansion investments in 2025, included chapter headings like New AI Research Solutions, AI for Extreme Events and Disaster Response, Protecting the Planet with our AI Products. Meanwhile, the rapid and dangerous growth of emissions generated to power AI models by 11 million tons annually since 2019 gets relegated to 4 short paragraphs in the report, titled A Piece of the Puzzle. In Microsoft's sustainability report, a chapter called Accelerating Progress Through Technology argues that AI is essential for accelerating sustainability solutions, listing numerous products providing ESG data, efficient cloud services, etc., how it's being used to advance climate science. However, Microsoft's emissions have grown 55% since 2021, and this doesn't include the massive unreported emissions caused by the wing of its businesses developing AI for oil and gas exploration and extraction, estimated by the Enabled Emissions Campaign to dwarf the company's emissions many times over. And while emissions tell part of this story, the reality on the ground really shows the true picture. Despite lofty commitments, clever emissions accounting, and greenwashing energy claims, the growth of AI is rapidly and dangerously locking in massive growth in fossil fuel infrastructure, often in communities with a history of facing large-scale environmental and social impacts as a result of industry. This week, at Climate Week, Stand.earth released a new report, which you'll find a card on your chairs linking to. It was titled Global Ramifications, Local Impact, Microsoft's AI Pollution Footprint. The report looked at Microsoft's growth trajectory to 2030, by which time it plans to be climate negative, and analyzed the way that it's powering its existing data center portfolio. We found that by 2030, Microsoft's annual North American-only energy consumption will rival that of the entire New England region. Based on its current approach to renewable energy procurement and the response and the investment from utilities that we're seeing, Microsoft's approach is actively contributing to a large-scale fossil fuel build-out. It's not just theoretical. In Person County, North Carolina, groups like Clean Water for North Carolina have been sounding the alarm about potential Microsoft mega site since the company bought the land over 18 months ago. And where the local utility, Duke Energy, is now proposing 2 new gas power stations and pipeline infrastructure in response to coming demand from industry, data centers and others. So as this story plays out again and again across the country, it draws in issues of water security, energy prices, decent jobs, job security, as well as democracy and misinformation. Companies' ability to control the narrative, decide the future of local utilities, and ultimately greenwash the massive impact of AI plays into all of these issues. For that reason, we should all be deeply concerned about the tale that they're spinning. The big tech companies have the answers, and any that they don't have yet, AI is going to figure out for us in time to undo the damage. So I'd like to introduce our brilliant panel now. We're so grateful to have them here sharing their experience and their expertise. So this Steph Gans is Assistant Director, Clean Water for North Carolina. Steph's a grassroots community organizer, social worker, and public health professional. And she was also instrumental in helping us produce our Microsoft report. So thank you so much. Kavita Thanamurthy is Organizing Fellow at Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. Kavita has been organizing with ACJ for the past 4 years, first as a member and software developer at Amazon, and now full-time with ACJ as an organizing fellow. Gilmer-Hill is a Detroit-based policy Associate at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition and a steering committee member for the Environmental Justice Caucus of Michigan. At MEJC, the fight against data centers has been a top priority, and he's worked with coalition partners across the state to push back against the environmental and economic impact of the data center boom on Michigan's working families. And Nicole Sugarman, my fellow panel organizer, is a senior campaigner at Kairos. In her role, she works to curb big tech's contributions to the climate crisis through the No Climate Results Found campaign, supports black, brown, and poor and working class communities in resisting tech infrastructure harms, and serves on the steering committee of the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition. All right, so my first question, I kind of want to dive in a little bit, start at the macro level of what we're seeing in terms of misinformation, disinformation from big tech on AI. So I'll start kind of with Nicole and Kavita. So from your work looking at Google and Amazon, what are the ways that you see big tech companies hiding or greenwashing the climate impact of AI expansion? And I guess how does this compare with the reality?
Yeah, so the growth of AI is really reshaping the entire landscape and throwing out all of our climate goals around coal, natural gas, and just fossil fuels in general. And this manufactured race around AI, combined with the scale of Amazon and finally the Trump administration, is creating this huge land grab, as well as water, electricity for these data centers where we're prioritizing them over the frontline communities that need access to these things. So really it's sort of a battle of what is the society that we want to build, right? In terms of the macro level of, we have the US AI Action Plan released by the government. We have AWS giving a $1 billion coupon for the government to sort of get more of their infrastructure onto AWS. And then we have the US Sandbox Act, right? So all of these things are working in conjunction to sort of solidify power. And then, who is Amazon, right? Amazon last year claimed to have 100% renewable energy. And we had done a research report independently of this and found that number to be closer to 22%. And this difference is from creative accounting and recs and things like that. Additionally, we're supposed to be on a glide path towards net zero, but really emissions have grown almost 35%, which is really crazy when you think about it, because they're actually only counting 1% of sales. This is Amazon branded and fulfilled products versus even competitors like Target and Walmart include third-party emissions as part of their numbers. And now we take that into data centers, and we take this company that has done those things, and we combine it with them wanting to spend $150 billion in investments in data centers around the company or around the country. And lastly, this is at a time, right, when we've surpassed 1.5 degrees Celsius, and like you said in your intro, we have all these promises that are being given by big tech around, we'll solve the climate crisis, we'll solve cancer, we'll solve all of these things, when we're not seeing evidence of that, and what we are seeing is the restarting of fossil fuels and other harmful things to the environment.
Thanks, Kavita. And we are seeing really similar issues going on with Google's reporting. So unlike Kavita, who was a former Amazon employee, Kairos is a user-centered organization. So we focus on organizing the folks, users or people who interact with tech every day. So you, me, my mom, kids, all of us, to understand tech's impacts on our life. So we came to doing climate work as one of the lenses into our fight against systemic injustice. We started with Google because Google crafts a reputation, or they have in the past, as kind of being better than their peers in terms of ethics, in terms of their environmental care. They're like really out there, in the sustainability space. And on some specific environmental issues, this is partially true. They're not all completely equivalent, but in general, they're doing real harm to communities and the climate, and it's not a fluke. It's been that way since the company was founded. The trends we see with their impacts are really very similar to the trends that we see with these other big tech companies. So earlier this year, we started analyzing Google's annual environmental reports, working with an awesome research team. And we started going back and pulling out trends to see how what they were saying matched up with the reality of their impact. What we found was pretty astonishing to us. We found a lot more difference between those two than we even expected to. We obviously knew they wouldn't match up completely. And the extent to which the reports were telling a false story was pretty tremendous. So one of the tricks that Google employs that is not unique to Google, but they talk a lot about the efficiency of their data centers, and then use that efficiency ratio to obscure their actual emissions numbers. But at the rate that they're expanding, if you have 200 more efficient data centers, and then you expand to 400, even if they're a little bit more efficient, the net effects of the emissions is going to be higher. It doesn't matter whether the light bulbs they use are now LED light bulbs, instead of like a fluorescent, instead of whatever, incandescent light bulbs, which is literally what they were doing. They were telling us, bragging about the efficiency of the non-computer components of their data centers, in a data center that's meant to house computers, and that's what it does. And they do this intentionally to, distract people from the real impact of their AI expansion. We also saw this focus on efficiency show up in other places. So we saw it show up in their discussion of the AI models, where the same thing happens. If you have a more efficient AI model, but you're using it in 10 times as many places, it's still going to emit more. And we saw this happen in their water use. So so just look out for it. As they talk about the efficiency, they're masking something about the real impact because of the actual scope of the expansion. Another thing that Google has done is over the years, they've shifted their language to de-emphasize promises they've made in the past that they're no longer going to be able to meet. And then they shift their language to kind of redefine issues that don't suit their current interests. So for example, over the span of their environmental reports that they've published since I forget exactly where they started publishing them, but they published them for a while now. In 2018 was the last time they referenced renewable energy as one of their goals. And from 2019 to the present, they use carbon-free energy instead. So switching from renewable to carbon-free enables them to include other things in that category, including nuclear, including, they say on a case-by-case basis, carbon capture and biomass, things that climate justice advocates would not consider to be renewable, sustainable, or good energy solutions. And just a shout out to Chris here, who may talk about it more later on. If he doesn't, please ask him questions at the end, because Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition does amazing work around stopping carbon capture in the state. But big tech invests in these false solutions heavily to try to distract from the things that they actually could be doing, which are proven to actually curb their impact, which would be bringing their energy use down between planetary bounds. Just one more example of the shifting goalposts. In 2021, Google's leadership set a goal to achieve net zero emissions before 2030, meaning that the company would have allegedly planned to balance out its emissions of greenhouse gases with its removal of greenhouse gases, so the total sum is zero. So they talked about this goal, achieving net zero emissions through 2024, in the first 10 pages of the report. So this is a major part of their, okay, I see you, thank you, of their sustainability plan. In 2024, they said they were going to achieve it by 2030 instead of before. This year, they took out the goal entirely. They put it in the appendix, and they changed it to a ambition-based carbon reduction moonshot, which a moonshot is a fancy tech term for something, this is really wild. Maybe if we're wildly successful, we might be able to do this. But they never said, we're not going to meet our net zero goal. They just said, we have this crazy moonshot, maybe we'll meet it. And they did a lot of other similar, like, creative reporting, or creative, yeah, like Benita said, very, like, creative, you know, just basically, in another way of saying it is lies, you know, but they, it's these PR finagling to get out of saying, like, we're not going to meet our impact, our goals, and their energy use, in fact, has risen 820% since 2010, and its water withdrawal has increased 340%.
One thing I just want to add really quickly, because what Nicole said reminded me is, similarly at Amazon, they deleted the shipment zero goal, which was to get to net zero by 2040, and then 50% of the way there by 2030. And like, there was no news about like them taking it out. They just like deleted it off their website, and reporters and other, you know, advocacy groups saw it, and then like released a small statement being like, oh well, you know, it doesn't make sense to have, you know, this incremental thing. Like we're on track for the full thing, but like it doesn't make sense. So we're gonna get rid of it. So I just wanted to say it's the same playbook in different places.
Yeah, I mean, so familiar hearing the things that you're saying about Google and Amazon working on Microsoft. I think my favorite one, and I will be really quick, is that they announced that their own moonshot was still, you know, a goal, but the moon has gone further away. Which is, I feel like a little bit like signing up for a marathon, running in the wrong direction and then complaining that it got longer. Anyway, but I want to turn now to Steph and Chris. So you both represent communities that are dealing with the reality of the data center build out on the ground. So maybe you can just tell us a bit about what is happening in your communities right now, and yeah, what do you want us to know about?
Thank you. Yeah. So my organization that I work for, Clean Water for North Carolina, we have been involved in environmental justice struggles for over 40 years, including in a community in Person County, North Carolina, where the largest coal plant in the state currently operates, and our local utility, Duke Energy, proposed to build 2 new gas plants and a big old pipeline to fuel them into that community, supposedly as a way to retire the coal plant. So, you know, that was already deeply concerning enough, but the gas plants, you know, they weren't just retiring the coal plant. The amount that they could generate could go above and beyond that, right? And so who was that? Who were some of those customers going to be? And it turned out, you know, where the gas goes in North Carolina, the data centers are following, not just in Person County, but in some of the other counties in the state where they're going to build pipelines and new gas plants. And so a few months, you know, however many months down the line, we heard that, oh yeah, Microsoft bought, you know, more than 1,000 acres of land really close to that coal plant and really close to a community that we've worked with for a long time that has had groundwater contamination from their coal ash. And we fought for filtration and coal ash cleanup. If folks have heard about the big coal ash spill in the Dan River in North Carolina, Duke Energy has had these unlined coal ash pits throughout the state, and different communities near these coal plants have dealt with the groundwater contamination, as well as, and we have a lot of rural people that are using wells, so that's contaminated drinking water, as well as air pollution. And so then we see communities getting targeted again with new methane gas power plants and pipelines, and then again now by potential data centers. So I will say, you know, Microsoft bought that land. They haven't said what it's for, but it's really hard to imagine what other use it would be for. They don't really manufacture anything. This is kind of their business. And community members have certainly identified that, and in the hearings, the public hearings on the gas plant, that was identified by both community members who are looking at the pipeline crossing through their land, as well as folks from the county saying, Duke Energy was part of the conversations with Microsoft. You know, we need this gas plant. So it doesn't matter what Microsoft says. It doesn't matter what moonshot goals that they have. You know, they bear some responsibility for this.
Yeah, and I would echo a lot of those points. I think in Michigan especially, I mean, I'm talking about magical thinking. These data centers operate on an economic logic that is just at odds with what's good for folks in our state. And so when we look at some of these communities that they're coming to, we're talking places that are really desperate for investment, places that have been underinvested in, places that haven't seen the benefits of the pivot to the knowledge economy nationwide, of the tech economy. And these places, understandably, have lawmakers that are very open to this idea that tech is finally going to come to Benton Harbor, or Flint, or Detroit, or River Rouge, that our community might finally get some of these good tech jobs that we thought went away permanently. And heartbreakingly, that just is not the case categorically. We know that data centers, when they come to town, are not going to be hiring 200 software designers in your city. That are going to be hiring maybe 30 security guards. And if you can make that case to people, that gets them to see that this is not good for our community. Now, in Michigan, we have pretty strong utility monopolies that exert a ton of influence in our state legislature. And these are also some of the most unpopular entities in our state. And one thing that we've really seen is that folks understand the economic logic part of, say, DTE, which is one of the bigger monopolies in our state. So when we tell people that the group behind these data centers is actually DTE, and they just want to raise your rates, that narrative hits home because they see that this utility has been raising their rates and failing to fix the grid for their entire lives. There's fundamentally an economic story to tell the folks here that just is successful, and we've seen when we tell people, like, this is what's going to happen when a data center comes into your community. This is how it's going to impact your race. This is how it's going to impact water, health in your community, air quality. People understand that this is bad for them. And in some places, we've already seen successes. And we've seen hundreds of folks come out in some of these smaller rural areas to tell their local government, say no to data centers. Just a couple weeks ago, we actually had a big win in a city outside of Ann Arbor. And we kind of reached the temper tantrum phase where these companies get told no and then either try to sue or try to argue they didn't need permission in the first place. Optimistically, I think that those lawsuits are not going to go the wrong way. I think that the law is pretty clear here. But if we have precedents that we're able to say no in some of these rural communities, which admittedly happen to be also some of the wealthier places that try to build these, we at least have a precedent to say, your community can say no to this, and here's our vision for what economic development can look like. If we have a vision for what genuine, clean, ideally publicly owned energy looks like across Michigan, if we have a vision for what a just transition with good jobs looks like, if we have something that we can bring to these communities that are getting pitched on data centers, we can get them to say no. If we can get folks, at least in Michigan, to say no, then there's no reason we couldn't have that nationwide. Like, there's no community that actually benefits from data centers, and that's a case that has been not easy to make, but successful when we are able to make it.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing and so inspiring to hear about the work you're doing. And I think that kind of leads me on quite nicely actually to my next question, which is how we all or you all have been pushing back for, and really how the companies have been reacting to your advocacy. Do you find that they have been open? I mean, Microsoft in particular, I will say, kind of really talks a lot about its community benefit program, for example, about the way that it works with communities to create mutually beneficial data center proposals. So, I mean, maybe I'll start with you, Steph. Like, what's your experience been?
Well, we've yet to hear from Microsoft. So community members that live near the site put together a list of questions, really just a list of questions to understand what the impact of what were Microsoft's plans for the location, and what was the impact going to be. And part of that was fueled by both the fact that in another county, another coal plant, another pipeline in a state called Catawba County, Microsoft has plans for 4 huge data center campuses that would also be connected up to methane gas generation, where there's also been coal ash contamination. And so looking at that, that's going to generate some concerns. And then on top of that, there was an American Petroleum Institute lobbyist, so a gas lobbyist, who showed a map to our North Carolina decision makers, our North Carolina state legislators, labeling the location as a future Microsoft data center, right? So, people are saying, well, why does a gas lobbyist know something that we don't know? This is not a transparent process. This is not a democratic process. This is not community engagement. So those questions are still out there. And community members are still signing on to those, and yet to get any answers on those.
It's no secret that Amazon has been in the news continuously around its treatment of warehouse workers and concerns there. Right? Amazon labor union faced really brutal anti-union campaign, same with Cause, Carolina, Amazonians United. They sent over 30 people to crush this growing force. So I think it's no shock to anybody in this room that Amazon wields its power in this way. But at Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, right, we have been organizing since 2018, and we really see this opportunity where, if workers partner with frontline communities as well as, logistics workers and warehouse workers, right? We have the numbers. There's a lot of power there, and so, in 2022, we came out in support of the Mount Baker community to demonstrate solidarity in terms of protesting a warehouse that was planning to be sited there, and the community was rightfully concerned around the environmental impacts that would be there. And so, and then we also partnered with Consumer Reports to demonstrate how Amazon was citing warehouses primarily in BIPOC communities, which really shifted the conversation and the Overton window, right, from warehouses just being this opportunity in these places to actually an environmental justice issue that was basically taking advantage of these disenfranchised communities. So we pushed for the climate pledge and won that in 2019, and there have been some wins there. We have over 24,000 electric vehicles, we have 240 utility-scale solar and wind farms, but this is in a landscape where there's a lot of fear in the company, and there's a big threat of retaliation, right? And I think that's in part because Amazon realizes that if we kind of bridge these different groups together, we have the numbers and we have the powers. And so there's a lot of opportunity there that we're always looking for. And then finally, I'll say in terms of into the communities that Amazon is coming with these data centers, right? If it is such an economic boon and such a such a prize to get this, then I would ask, why is it all behind NDAs? Why are they always doing things behind closed doors? And especially during the land access and the permitting process, and I even read there was one example where it wasn't revealed that it was Amazon till the day of the city council vote. So I would argue that if it's this incredible opportunity and Amazon is working with the communities, then why is it happening in this way?
I would say a lot of that goes for us in Michigan too. One of the big things we have to fight against is just the lack of transparency in this process. process, because especially when we're not dealing with a public entity like a university building a data center, legally there's nothing stopping almost everything from being behind closed doors almost until it's time to go. And in city after city across the state, that's what they try to do. They will release as little information as they can. What does get released looks more like a press release or a sales pitch rather than an actual binding document. And we're left to sort of piece together what their actual plan is. Now, fortunately, unfortunately, but it is helpful. And we have some examples now of what it looks like for a data center to come to town. And we can point to things like Grand Rapids or Memphis, that's recently been a really big one, where we can show that just concretely, when you get a data center in your neighborhood, regardless of what they're promising, this is what happens to your air quality, this is what happens to your energy. And people do really care about clean energy in a sort of abstract way. They care much more concretely about affordable energy. And especially somewhere like Detroit, we're fortunately able to make that case that things like solar, renewable energy, investment in energy for the community, investment in utility accountability, these are things that make our grid cleaner and cheaper for everybody. And they're also incompatible with a data center build out that the utilities want to fuel with methane gas, with coal, etc. So fortunately, we do have tools to fight back against this, but a lot of it has been very reliant on pretty last-minute organic community turnout. And one reason why we're still very optimistic is that people in the communities where these data centers are coming do still turn out even at the last minute because they understand this is going to be bad for their communities. So like right now, I believe within the last couple of days, there was a meeting in Howell, Michigan. And I don't know if anyone here is from Michigan. Howell is not a progressive bastion. It is, Klan City is one of the more neutral descriptions. It is becoming less unpleasant, but it is historically a very right-wing place. And you still had hundreds of people in this city come out opposing data centers because they understand that in a nonpartisan, in a neutral way, this is bad for their community. That wasn't something that we had to go in and organize. Certainly public education has been a very strong tool, but we didn't put out a ton of information in Howell, and people were still able to come out, tell their local officials, we don't want this. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the local officials are always going to immediately do the right thing. We have cases where in Michigan some local officials have voted it down, and unfortunately we also have cases where local officials have tried to push it through. And so places like Augusta Township, for example, citizens led an effort to put a ballot measure on reversing a zoning decision. And that'll hopefully be coming up on the ballot pretty soon there. So there are tools to fight back at the community level, but fighting back often really looks like community engagement, community education, and empowering the people on the ground with information about how this is going to impact them, so that they can use the existing levels of power and either fight back or reverse decisions that are already made to keep this out of their community.
Google uses all these tactics as well, and no, Google has not engaged with us directly pretty much at all, except to respond to our report, with their own kind of milquetoast quote in articles. But two ways that, one way that we see Google interacting with us and our movements that's worth bringing up is their co-optation of terms that our movement is using, and this is kind of a way that they are trying to fight back and just something we should be aware of. So for example, Holly and Will here have a campaign called the Enabled Emissions Campaign, which seeks to expose how AI is helping the oil and gas industry and enabling oil and gas extraction that would previously not be possible. So those are referred to as enabled emissions or emissions enabled by AI. Google came out in their report with enabled emissions reductions, which is a made-up term that they use to mean that the emissions that they supposedly saved using AI, except obviously those emissions would not be there for AI to begin with. And the way that they calculate their enabled emissions reductions is specious, not grounded in reality, and is not verifiable by a third party. They admit in the fine print as estimates. So it's just a way that they're taking terms that as our movements develop terms to kind of explain what's going on, they're taking them and they're they're co-opting them to try to make them less powerful. The one other thing that I'll mention is another tool that these companies use that makes us understand that they're not engaging with our communities in good faith. Is they're kind of like, so they're stealing our resources. Obviously, they're stealing our electricity, they're stealing our water, they're stealing our energy, but they also are stealing our literal money, our tax money. So in North Carolina, Google has a really large data center. It's considering expanding the data center, but it's being like incentivized, like it's considering expanding the data center after the town that they're in promised them performance-based rebates for 50% of the real property taxes and 85% of personal property taxes over 20 years in exchange for 30 jobs. So Google's owner, Alphabet, has a market value of $2 trillion, annual revenue of $307 billion, and they're receiving tax rebates, that take money directly away from our children's public schools, our libraries, our public health services. So it's just another, if they were engaging in good faith, we know that these companies don't need those handouts, and we know that our small businesses and our people are not getting those handouts. So it's just another way that we know that they're not engaging in good faith with the data center rollout.
I think the one thing that's interesting that you can see at both the kind of on the ground community level and at the sort of macro company level that Nicole and Vita and I are looking at is the lack of transparency or the kind of obfuscation that you see, because failure to even acknowledge which company is making the application, and then at the sort of macro level they are effectively hiding emissions data, hiding energy data by lumping it in groups, or putting co-location centers, which are non-owned data center, for which they still are responsible for the emissions for, but that emission data will be lumped in with everything else in scope 3, and you can't tell what it is or how many recs have been applied to reduce that number, and it makes it very challenging for us to actually identify where the problems are, and it makes it harder for groups like ours to actually challenge the things that are going on. And it's not an accident. I want to go quickly, since we're sort of heading towards the end of our panel time, towards the more positive vision, as is classic in a panel. Because I think that it's really important actually to talk about what we want the companies to do. Obviously we can sit here and complain about them for many, many hours, and I'm sure we all will later, we're going for dinner. But I think it would be really great to hear from you guys, either in the case of the macro level or within your community when it comes to community benefit, how can this be done sustainable? What would your vision be for a good relationship with Microsoft, Google, Amazon, or with their relationship with us as consumers?
Yeah, I think obviously some transparency and some answers to the questions that people have already put out from Person County to Microsoft about what's going on, and a genuine engagement and willingness to listen to what the community response is to that, what the concerns are, first and foremost. But I would say on a larger level, Person County, as I already mentioned, is not the only county where we've had county officials use the specter of Microsoft coming to town as a reason to approve gas infrastructure. And I mentioned our state lawmakers as well. And in North Carolina, our Utilities Commission is, the majority of the positions come through our state legislature. And if you've heard anything about North Carolina in the national news, you know that North Carolina is one of the most badly gerrymandered states in the country. And there's not relief for that on the horizon. So we have an undemocratic process for regulating our utility, Duke Energy, who is benefiting from companies like Microsoft and other big tech companies that are the big customers that have a lot of power and a lot of say. And because of that lack of democratic oversight, that the people don't have real democratic oversight over their public utility. They have so much more power, and what they want, if they wanted renewable energy, it would be here yesterday. If they drove a hard bargain, they really do hold a lot of the power about North Carolina's climate future. The community where they bought this land went through Tropical Storm Chantal. It didn't get a lot of national news, but it brought more rainfall in a quicker period of time to that area just north of the Research Triangle than the famous Hurricane Fran. We went through in North Carolina Hurricane Helene, right? I hope that they realize that they really do hold a lot of power, and we're basically paying, being forced to pay for a source of electricity generation, gas power plants that's convenient for them, and that really serves their interests when our needs could be served by clean energy. So we're kind of tired of being asked to pay Bill Gates' electric bill. I don't think he needs the help. And they need to recognize that they hold the cards here, and if they told Duke Energy, make it clean, they would.
So yeah, I would say, centering the work that grassroots organizers and these communities know what they want, actually listen and making this a reality. But in terms of the data centers and the build out, right? There is like a series of things Amazon could be doing, right? We could be coupling all data centers, not just new ones, but existing ones, to local renewable energy with transmission lines that power this 24/7, eliminating those low quality carbon offsets and credits that we talked about earlier, ending those custom AI solutions and partnerships with oil and gas companies to just expand drilling, and finally, science-based target initiatives dropped Amazon after they were unable to prove out their plan. So actually having industry standard verifications of Amazon's emissions targets rather than coming up with their own that are backed by real science. So like there are clear things and steps that Amazon and big tech companies could be doing. Like others have said, actually being like stopping the handouts that are coming their way. We often don't think of like tax dollars as like things that could work for us, but these are things that could be for schools and playgrounds and healthcare and like actual things that we need. And then, coupled with that, right, like having an actual lens around what we're using this technology for, It doesn't need to be everywhere for every single use case. We could be more discerning, and then, we wouldn't need this like massive hyperscale growth that is currently being, reported as necessary and needed. And lastly, I think this is a fight that is happening on many different levels. There is like the community and frontline fight about like not having the data centers in their community, as well as providing a playbook for other communities, so that it's not just going from one disenfranchised place to another. We're focused on the worker front, but actually pushing the company from inside to uphold these standards. And the legislative fight, right? Like having, that one's not going so great right now, but having standards and pushing from there. But I do want to call out, there have been community wins, and we need to celebrate those. Tucson voted unanimously against a $14 billion project for a data center there, and that was through local community organizing. Bessemer paused on a $14.5 billion hyperscale data center. St. Charles in Missouri put a moratorium for 1 year. So things are possible, and people are pushing, and so we just need to connect these fights and keep going.
So I sort of hold two kind of contradictory visions for what this looks like long term. much more pessimistic than the other. And I think pessimistic first. Like, I think we're in a world where NVIDIA is so overvalued. On paper, it's the same size as the GDP of like a medium-sized country. Like, that is not sustainable. I think that in the long run, AI, as it looks like right now, this particular hype-fueled chatbot bubble, I don't think there's a future long-term for that. And I think like the vision I see for what it looks like to protect ourselves from that involves a lot more of making sure that our communities don't end up dependent on this thing that I think will substantially go away within the next year or two. It looks like ensuring that while it is coming to our communities, we're not having it powered by diesel backup generators, that they're paying their taxes, that they're paying a reasonable amount for electricity and not making that worse for everybody else. And I think those are all winnable fights, but I think that's what that looks like in the short term. But in the long run, I do think that there is a more optimistic vision here, both in terms of what energy and water and environmental protections look like, and also in terms of what AI itself looks like. So energy-wise, a lot of the problems, at least in Michigan, but also certainly nationwide, come from the fact that the utilities, the energy companies that we're dealing with, these are for-profit, investor-owned utilities. And so they're trying to create a world where the energy market looks like the housing market, where because of data centers everywhere, it just is structurally impossible to actually meet demand because there's this functionally infinite, in their vision, eternally growing demand for electricity. So we're just going to constantly jack up the rates. And that's something that we don't have to accept. And if we had publicly owned utilities that were operating in the public interest, that were required to charge these data centers a rate that at least isn't subsidizing it on the back of ratepayers, that's a world we could avoid. But I think even beyond that, in a world where we have public infrastructure, publicly owned power, there's also a vision for AI where it becomes an actual tool to solve problems. Like when you strip away the sort of hype, the marketing, the Hollywood Skynet vision, AI is fundamentally a computing model that was inspired by research in the human visual cortex, right? And I think there's a lot to learn from funding public university research, funding more insight into what exists in nature, what computing models are there, how can we use that to solve problems that do exist. And if we fund that research, if we make sure that it's happening in the public interest, I think there's absolutely a positive vision where we're able to use these systems, to use this technological progress to actually benefit everybody and not to just inflate the value of like 7 companies.
Yeah, we approach it kind of similarly. So to start with a vision of sustainable like AI build out, I think Kairos starts with the question instead of like how can we build AI sustainably, what AI do we actually need and how does it serve us? Because a lot of the AI use cases currently, this panel is all about kind of greenwashing and magical thinking. They are selling us a vision of AI for good when a lot of the use cases, most of the use cases I dare say, are about surveilling low-wage workers, bringing extra layers of awfulness to like revenge porn, tracking people through AI-assisted video surveillance, like Flock surveillance system, ShotSpotter, AI-detected cop, cameras that criminalize our communities, further increase the wage gap, and otherwise, help genociding armies kill more people. They sound dystopian. These are real use cases, and they don't serve us. We wouldn't choose them, and we don't actually need the AI that is building them out. And if you start with that perspective, then it becomes less about, how can we power all these data centers with renewable energy, and more about, like, how do we make sure that this technology is not harming our communities. So there are really 2 pieces to that for like a power analysis, it's like who's deciding and who benefits. So equitable AI will be developed by our communities, Black communities, brown, queer, working class, gender non-conforming women. They will suit our community's needs to be developed in ways that we control, sign off on, and then we benefit from their use and the profit. So for example, who decides, we wouldn't have development proposals hidden behind NDAs, no AI that makes precarious and low-wage workers more precarious, and no AI for surveillance extraction, non-consensual deepfakes, etc. and who benefits. If AI is going to take our jobs, like, we should be getting the profit so that we can thrive. If AI is trained off our data, the profit it creates should be ours. If AI is going to our communities, the money it makes should go to funding our schools and the libraries, and the jobs should be good paying, stable, and they should be our community jobs. So this is like a way of connecting the various struggles between, the workers, the tech users, the community members, like all the parts of it must be, decided by us, and we should benefit. And then it makes it harder for us to sell each other out, because, we know that if say a data center was community owned, that's a question I got once, like, what do you think about community owned data centers? It's like, it's a fine idea, but if the community owned data center is being used to store, like, flock video surveillance of license plate readers all over the country that's then being used by ICE, like, that's still not our jam, and if a data center is powered by 100% renewable energy, but it's built on a beloved community green space, also not, our vision. So our vision is one where everyone is impacted, and the folks most impacted get to become deciders in the future.
Yeah, I think when at Stand, when we were thinking about this, like, we actually named our report, like, nicknamed it Project Crossroads, because there's this feeling that, like, these tech companies have so much power, and the way that the incredible speed of build out and growth has such a potential to influence the direction of travel of energy and in this country. I think the one thing that we really kind of came out of our research was this, actually the tech companies, like, some of them have pretty strong climate commitments as they go, right? By corporate commitments, like, they're pretty strong, with strong energy commitments, and yet we're seeing massive build out of fossil fuel infrastructure, because it's not enough. Like, even that, the scale of this means that all of that is, like, looking even to 2030, it's too far away. We need to be thinking about right now. So, for us, it's really a question of, like, if there is going to be a positive vision, then they need to have there needs to be a new type of contract, a new type of sort of social contract, a new type of commitment, which applies right now, where companies are ensuring that there are no new data centers unless they are running 24/7 around the clock on renewables, unless that they are made with the active agreement and participation of communities. Because if not, then it's just going to lock in hard, it's going to lock in fossil fuels. And even if, we're sort of hearing about moonshot goals getting pushed away, or, 2030 is seeming a little bit out of reach, but we're going to be really, hammering tones to that 2050 target. It's like, it's not good enough. We can't rely on pushing our problems off to the future. So that's kind of the vision that we want to put out now, is that, like, that actually there needs to be a new type of commitment for an AI age, because the ones that we have are just not serving us anymore. Okay, well, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists, because, like, so inspiring, so exciting to hear about all the things that are going on, even depressing things like this all the time. And I would like to open up the floor to a bit of a Q&A. We have a mic, but I'm not sure that we need it. It's not a very big room. So maybe if you have a question, I'll repeat it for the live stream audience. That's okay. So, yes, please.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for grounding us in the specific examples of harm and lack of transparency. To be less hopeful than maybe some ending things, what do you all think of some of tech companies right now are embedded with the, like, fascist administration running this country, and there's an accelerationist worldview that wants to accelerate climate change. I don't think that tech company leaders are stupid. Many of them do know that they are accelerating climate change while they build bunkers. So I'm curious, how does a worldview that's trying to accelerate end times in the Christian national worldview mesh with Like, do you all see that as part of what we need to actually articulate in the fight against this like AI mad, like mad grab for land and energy and water and everything else?
Who wants to go in on how fascist the AI data types? Well,
And yeah, I totally agree that, especially at the federal level, the amount of backing, the idea that these companies are already sort of too big to fail and just shouldn't be allowed to collapse, like that is going to be a genuine problem, especially as I think this AI bubble is going to start to show legal signs of weakness very soon. I think the climate change aspect of that absolutely is an apocalyptic threat and something that we need to really communicate, because most of the time when we talk about climate change impact from any one thing, we recognize we're talking about something marginal. We're talking about the cumulative impact of a bunch of things and how every little bit matters. With data centers specifically, we're talking about something where like in Michigan, this is projected to be something like 12% of the energy consumption in our state pretty soon. We're already at 4%. Like we're talking about one category, one thing that by itself is going to have a massive climate impact. And that is something that absolutely we can communicate to people, both in terms of the climate impact, which is real and which a lot of people really do care about, and the affordability impact, which goes right along with that, and which unfortunately a lot more people care about because that it hits their pocketbooks. And like that's something that people care about across party lines, rural, urban, wherever you are. That communicating that this one thing is going to have a huge impact absolutely is a big part of the fight. But I do think there's, I would argue optimistic slightly, but not really optimistic. Like there's an angle to this where a lot of the biggest backers of AI will sometimes pretend to also share our sort of fears of an apocalyptic outcome here. And they tend to couch that more in almost sci-fi terms, claiming that AI is going to be so good that it ends the world. And as someone with I have a bit of a tech background, that's what my degree is in. And I mean, if you look at the actual cases of AI going wrong, it's not AI being so good at its job that it finds the solution no human could have thought of. It's Amazon made an AI to read resumes and told it to not discriminate, and then it kicked out any resume that had a women's college or an HBCU. Like these are not intelligent programs. And I think just communicating to people what it actually looks like for AI to go wrong goes a long way in undermining the sort of veneer of this is the path to the high-tech future, and grounding us in the reality of, okay, AI isn't going to save our communities, what can we actually invest in? And if you make the case to people that clean, affordable energy is a part of that, that is one of the biggest things that can really unfix this. Because at least in Michigan, absolutely this is being pushed by big tech, but the energy question, even more so than air and water and all these other genuinely very important things, the energy question, the utility influence, DTE, etc., that has been absolutely critical, and that's the thing that really gets people on our side.
Yeah, I would say, I think what you're describing is really the reason that we need to widen the tent. That this goes, I think Nicole was, and what you were saying as well, goes, beyond just the climate impacts. It goes to the impacts on, immigration enforcement. It goes to the impact on, I heard that in Michigan, nurses were fighting, AI in the workplace in the hospital. The attempt to use AI to turn our hospitals into an Amazon warehouse. The potential for, our teachers. What are our teachers going through in the classroom with the existence of AI? It's already making so many workers and so many people's lives worse. And if we can come together with those different constituencies and widen the tent beyond, I wish climate, brought everybody to the table, but a lot of people are just trying to survive, right? And to all come together on that stuff. I think really that is the solution.
Yeah. Do you want to try and wrap the?
I think I can just speak up. So to touch back on the utility self-dealing aspect of this a little bit, where do you think the demand is coming from for this stuff? Because there's a lot of okay, NVIDIA pays Microsoft, or NVIDIA pays OpenAI $100 billion, OpenAI pays NVIDIA $100 billion. Somebody's paying all of these non-transparent zoning decisions that are being made. If the states are handing out tax incentives to companies that don't need them, where is the incentive for the states to do that coming from? Do you think that, I think earlier you sort of implied that you feel like a lot of this valuation is sort of inflated. Do you think that this is all a sort of a last stand of oil and gas companies trying to exert political power while they still have it, to sort of wring the last little bit of money out of their non-renewable resources while they can? Or where's the political pressure for this coming from, if not from people who want AI, which is, I think that's not a strong enough force to drive this.
So for the live stream audience, can I summarize my question as, where is the money going, and
where's the political will coming from?
Yeah, where is the political will coming from, and what do you think is really driving the utilities build out? That's an interesting question.
I think, you're absolutely right. This is not a normal, real economic engine, because broadly, these companies are not actually making money from data centers. Data centers bleed unbelievable amounts of money. When you're talking about using this much electricity and water, you have to pay for that. Even if you're getting a sweetheart deal from the utility, you're still paying a lot of money. So I think, at least in Michigan, we sort of saw this firsthand. The political will is coming from the utilities, essentially. Unfortunately, you can buy political will in Michigan, and it's relatively cheap. Something like 95% of our state legislators take money from DTE. And in a world where that's the case, DTE can often just get what they want. And right now, what they want is massive spikes in demand that put them in a negotiating position to come to our state regulatory commissions and say, we just can't build enough clean energy to meet this demand. So let us build the gas plant we've wanted to build for 20 years. Let us bring our coal plant back online, etc. These for-profit companies have assets that they know in a sane world they would be phasing out in favor of clean energy, and they know that that process is going to impact their bottom line, and they don't want to do that. So anything that these companies can do to undermine our insufficient but real clean energy standards in somewhere like Michigan, they are going to fight tooth and nail to do that. And I think, certainly there's other things going along with that. There's a vested interest in tech to, perpetuate this bubble, because if it pops, a lot of jobs, a lot of the economy goes with it. And we're all we're living with the consequences of a couple of investment decisions that SoftBank made a while ago. That's just where we're at. But this bubble is sort of self-perpetuating. These tech companies do have a lot of power on their own. That is absolutely part of that. I can just say, on the ground in Michigan, the utilities and the energy sector is really where this is coming from. So yes, absolutely, a lot of this is fossil fuel companies, energy companies, etc., making that last-ditch effort in the face of a public shaky consensus, but a consensus that we need clean energy, a last ditch to reinvest in fossil fuels to try to get as much of their money's worth, as much profit as they can wring out of these assets that should have been taken offline decades ago.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think that it's very clear that there's a really strong connection. I live in Canada, and you see, the Alberta government, where there is obviously a lot of oil and gas exploration, pitching for data centers to come so that they can run on fossil fuel power stations. So they're putting the energy first before there's even the demand for the data center. So, and I think the part of what we've been talking about here in the terms of the greenwashing of AI as a necessity is also kind of feeding into that, right? Because they have to justify the buildings.
And just real quickly, I think the other thing is, I grew up in Virginia near like the data center highway, right? And that's in Loudoun County where something crazy like 90% of the world's internet goes through it. And a lot of these states look at Virginia and they see the amount of revenue that is coming in through these data centers, right? And they're like, oh, this is like we could get this boom in Georgia or Indiana, right? But then are throwing themselves and taking away all these taxes and making the incentives so lucrative that they're A, not going to get that type of investment, B, they're going to pay dividends in terms of the water and electricity, and basically, you know, as Chris was saying, it's like this real one last squeeze of like short-term profit with no long-term thinking, and just like, you know, we have this potential for power between combining like workers and grassroots organizations. They have this sort of like politician meets oil meets utilities, right? And have their own sort of power around that. So.
I think the segue into what I was going to speak on is that when you look at this holistically, the whole entire landscape, it's all about politics, which means, as you say, which means power, you know, when it comes to utilities and so forth, because it's not just about AI, it's also about digital currency. All these things, when you mine Bitcoin, it requires massive units of power, you know. So you're looking at Google and Amazon, how they make their money. It's through advertising, it's through data. The data centers are nothing but big data warehouses. So that is the impetus, you know, for them creating it. So it's all about political money, and wherefore everybody has their hands in his pockets. Everyone's getting rich. So this what it's doing is creating a divide between the rich and the poor. That gap is getting larger and larger, and they're all realizing this. So everyone is trying to make as much money as they can as possible, so it's all being rolled up. You know, but when you're looking at the AI bubble, Bitcoin, you know, is basically another digital currency, you know, that the government can control. You basically can just shut it off and just, you know, wrap up your entire account, bank account if you want to. But it's number, you know, ones and zeros. You hit a button and it's boom. So you have to try to look at the big picture. It's actually, you start wondering, you know, we're looking at it from an aspect when it comes to the environment. Well, what about the humanistic part of it? You know, as you were saying earlier, how it's taking jobs. How can we look at how to dismantle AI and actually live for it? How are we actually really benefit from it? Except from people making, you know, reels on TikTok or Instagram. You know, all they're doing is just stealing people's opportunities. Because like, if you're an executive secretary, your job is out the window. That's gone. You know, if you're in any type of management, you know, type of position, your job is really gone. Because when I work in the tech field, I can program an algorithm to wipe the job out. No matter how, you know, I've been asked to work on an algorithm to wipe out my own job. So you guys really need to pay attention to that, and also start digging down into the younger youth of our generation, because they use it as some kind of entertainment tool. They think it's all cute and fun, and they're the easiest ones to be manipulated. Yes, I'm just saying, I'm just bringing that forward. The question is, how can we actually utilize, you know, our energy to start looking at a different method of attack when it comes to AI and Bitcoin and digital currency? How can we make a more humanistic and open people's eyes up so we can look? It's not just, you know, a tool for the environment. It's really getting you personally and actually take your job in your livelihood. Because no one's being reached on. That's not really being considered. You know, the work the job is gone. What's going to get people out of the world? How can we dismantle AI?
If I can summarize for the live audience, I think the question basically is like, how do you bring it home to people that this is not just about climate. How do you make it more relevant for people in their lives, in their workplaces, personally? Yeah. And maybe this is good for you.
I mean, I think Nicole touched on this a little bit in terms of the use cases that are currently being powered by this, right? Like, furthering ICE, furthering surveillance, creating military drones, and it's not just powering these data centers through renewable energy. It's the actual use cases that we're building, and how are we furthering research or advancing actual things in the interest of the community, and how do we get those voices in the room to drive this forward? Because otherwise, right, like we're going to continue seeing build out of this around surveillance, around expanding police operations. Just look at what's happening with Palantir, right? And so it's about the infrastructure, it's about the land, it's about the water, but it's also about the use cases.
Yeah, we've been seeing kind of 3 strategies that have been really successful as far as like bringing home the impacts and also connecting different parts of the struggle. So the first is like localized site fights that then don't stop with the site fight, but then connect it to other communities. So it's not like we don't want it in our town, but you can go put it in the next town that's not as well organized or politically franchised or whatever. It's we don't want it here, and we don't want it anywhere. So for example, in Ypsilanti in Michigan, they had a really amazing fight, stop the data center. They got their proposal postponed. It's still on the table, but it stayed for a year, and then they've taken their kind of their show on the road, so they're now like touring the Midwest, talking to other communities, like this is what we saw, this is what might be coming for you, this is kind of how we're seeing, the connections between militarism, surveillance, our own, like, I think they're going to build it in a forest, a beloved community forest, etc. So it's not about, NIMBY, not in my backyard, it's about, all of our fights being connected and all communities deserve a say. Another, employee organizing has been really amazing and kind of drawing leverage and also in solidarity. So, not only does AECJ do like amazing work in connecting, the warehouse workers with like the software engineers, but we have folks like No Tech for Apartheid, who's been doing principled, fearless organizing to get their companies, Google and Amazon, to stop working with the Israeli government, and really, so that's also like a data center fight, because all of that data is stored in data centers, like you were saying. And we actually, there was a big win today. Microsoft just announced it was going to stop working with the Israeli government after the Guardian exposed. Yeah, it's awesome that they had just millions of hours of footage of just Palestinian citizens talking on the phone. That the Israeli government was using to target. The last thing is power building groups and organizations are kind of recognizing the role that big tech plays in their basis struggles and then connecting the dots to chip away at the false solutions and tech that doesn't serve us. So 2 examples of that are the Stop ShotSpotter campaign in Chicago, got their city to drop a contract with AI gunshot detection software. Similar campaigns are underway against flock surveillance, ring cameras, etc. So this pushes away, it chips away at the use cases and makes it so we don't need as many data centers because we don't need to be storing this data at all. And then in my own home city of Philadelphia, the People's Tech Project is organizing to bring transparency to our city budget process with regard to how much money our city spends on AI and surveillance tech that they then use against our neighbors. And again, it's all behind closed doors. So just a couple examples of how we can bring in that humanistic approach.
So I think that's basically pretty much all we have time for. But I kind of wanted to finish on my thought with all this. Is there's so many brilliant answers here, and every time I come back to them, I just always think, oh, but it's so shit. It's just so why are we doing all of this? It's just I think that we were saying earlier, one of the big tactical errors that they kind of build out is made is that actually. People really, when you tell them all of this is going to happen, like these gas power plants, all this, it's going to come because of data centers for AI, and people's first, thought and interaction with AI is like ChatGPT or pictures, weird-looking pictures of Studio Ghibli characters, and they just think this doesn't bring value to my life. at all. And so I think that that's kind of, they've made a technical error there, and that's something that we can continue to really play off, is like, where is the benefit to humans, to communities, apart from which could even possibly outweigh all of the many negatives? So I want to say thank you again to our panelists. This has been amazing. I think that what we really learned here is that, what is happening on the ground, it really mirrors what is happening at the macro level, the HQ level. We need to be working together to shine a light through, to show some of that, to really push for that transparency, to identify those connective points, to connect folks on the ground who are really pushing, but also connect them at the HQ level. And, really just keep calling out the greenwashing. And I hope that we've convinced you today that there is some of that going on. So thank you everybody, thank you